in this session about institutional, pedagogical practice. The idea is to the discussion and debate about pedagogical practice in the context of international educational activities, speaking about innovation, adaptation to the context, the contrast, the difficulties, opportunity. And the idea is, well, to make a discussion and to make together a green paper that we have to propose to the EAAE. So perhaps what's interesting in the panel, there was a presentation about activities, about pedagogical activities. One question was discussion in a discussion I had with some of you, perhaps to discuss how this kind of exchange activities allowed to to improve the knowledge of other cultures, and how this knowledge allowed to improve the knowledge of our own culture. I mean, that will be a theme. If somebody wants to speak about it, it's okay. Or other themes, other subjects. Well, in the last presentation, I was in downstairs. We were speaking about how to to consider the local specificities as a material of project. I mean, but when we do that, we arrived to another context with our way of seeing the reality. So I think I will be heard, perhaps some of you, to perhaps if you have this experience, some pedagogical experience treating this this kind of dynamic, it will be interesting to discuss it.
So for us in our school, the most important, even if I was talking in this morning about students going to Central America, the most important what we do about this is not that for me. I mean that the story of students coming and going to other contexts, it is important in the way that they see other realities and they are aware of the differences of cultures, etc. But pedagogically talking, I am more interested maybe in what they do where they live. I mean, if they are able to be responsible, not in the places they visit, which is of course necessary too, but what kind of responsibility of ideas develop in the place they live, I mean Basque Country, Europe, or etc. Because also the development system is a global system, and what we do here in the north, global north, it's of course it's influencing what's happening in the south. So now the totality of the world is involved in the same play, in the same way, and it's important that students have the idea of what they are doing, how they are designing in their proper places, and how they are taking account of their community. So that's why when they go to other places, it's so clear the differences, it's so clear the necessity of taking account of the culture, etc. But it is also when they are doing at home, because till the moment, most of the times they don't think about it. They just go to the places and they build, they propose the designs, the urban plannings, without taking account the proper communities. So this cultural exchange helps them to become more aware that the whole is one. That is what I think.
In this case, if we speak concretely in a pedagogical practice, what do you think the better for that? What kind of pedagogical practice?
Well, what we are trying is we have made a group of professors of interdisciplinary. I mean, there are some from urban planning, from construction, from physics building, and we all have this perspective of social responsibility and architecture. And we are trying to develop inside our programs exercises in the subject that are already compulsory for students. We are trying to develop exercises to take into account this social responsibility in their work. I work, for example, I take the first year students, physics, I teach physics for architecture, and we deal with the question of energy, how energy is used for lighting, for warm supply, etc. In second year, they are in third year, they are more involved in urban planning, comparing different sorts of urban planning, and they can go to other areas in Bilbao or in more industrial areas and compare the way they can do urban planning in Mozambique or in Salvador and in Bilbao. In fourth year, they are involved more and more construction issues in the construction subject, and in the fifth year, they are more involved with projects. Last year, they developed some projects parallel in Bayonne and in Africa, Sahara. In Sahel, I think it was. So year per year, they are doing in the classes, they are taking these comparisons, or they are dealing with this social responsibility in the compulsory subject. And this is very anecdotic. I think that some of them, very few of them, go to Salvador and take back the knowledge. But the important is what we do every year with the students in our classes, not the ones which are very few that go and come back.
No, it's okay. Go on.
Hello, my name is Carmen Mendoza, and I'm the International University of Catalonia in Barcelona. We are a university that it's very transversal cooperation in architecture, because in the fourth year they have two compulsory subjects. First semester is international cooperation, so we've been working for the past 8 years with an NGO in India called Vicente Ferrer, which is a Catalan-based NGO. And the second semester is local cooperation, because I totally agree. We tend to think that we can only do cooperation out of Europe, and there's a lot to do in our own cities. So we work in peripheral neighborhoods in Barcelona, and it's also what's interesting is that we try to put in a methodology which is social and spatial. So this is a method that is not easy. The qualitative analysis is tried to transform into maps that are physical, that will guide the design process. So this is basically what we're trying to implement in undergrad. But I direct a master in international cooperation, sustainable emergency architecture, where we are at a post-master's, I think you say. For us in Spain, it's 5 years, and then it's a master's degree. And we're into research, so it'd be really nice afterwards if we could talk with anybody that's working in these topics of post-conflict and post-disaster. We're going into research in these fields in our school, and from our master's programs, there's more and more doctorate students that are going on. But one of the things I wanted to bring to the table is the interscalar approach we have. I think it's really necessary, because when you go abroad, you see that architects are just thinking of buildings, and it's really shocking for us to see this methodology where you're not thinking of the building as part of a street or a neighborhood or a city in itself. So our final degree project is a whole year, and it goes from the territorial scale, because we start the second semester of the fourth year at a 1/10,000 scale. And they work in groups, then they work individually, then they work in groups. So I think this is something that's quite singular. And we can do it because we're a small school, I have to say that. We have a very 12-to-1 group in design. It's a private university. But we really believe that in all contexts, this is mandatory. I mean, you cannot think about the building without the context. And when we're talking about developing countries even more, our responsibility of knowledge transfer there is very high. What are we trying? We learn a lot more. The transfers in both senses, we believe. And we think that the scale of the urban scale has to be there. In Spain, there's no difference between planning and architecture. So we talk about urbanism in general. So this is something that I think we try to enforce and reinforce at the master's level too, because we have students from all over the world in this Master of Cooperation, and many architects come just thinking of the building. So this is the first thing we try to be very incisive on. And I just wanted to ask whoever's working on this, one of the things that's very difficult for us when we go abroad is what are the partnerships as universities? Whoever our partnership is in the projects we're developing will have one outcome or the other, because there's a lot of power relationships in these places and all the world. So who is guiding the partnership, or how is the equality of the partnership? Is the community-based organizations, local universities, local students, and foreign students? We find that through our experience these past 8 years of the masters, it really pays off if there's local universities involved, if there's local students involved, if there's a community-based organization, because then it becomes sustainable. So that's something I wanted to see, if you guys have experience in this, how it's worked out for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a remark, but I think it can continue on what you just put on the table or on the floor or in the air. I don't know which reference, spatial reference I should use. We have experience with students in Suriname and Egypt and somewhere in other cultures. But I have really difficulties by doing it ourselves, but also with the way how we talk about it. I really think it's too light. We think that it's very noble that we do it because we want to raise social awareness. We want that our students are aware of the world in which we live, which is bigger than the one that they will know. And we want to confront them with very extreme situations or radical situations, and we want to let them know what it means to live in another culture and society. But then the next step is that we use our methods to analyze. I think the keynote this morning was very interesting, and it was an amazing atlas of methodological approaches of mapping. And mapping is ontological. It's defining what you see and what you are consist of. But it's a Western way of analyzing, of distracting the world. And it's very difficult to leave this, because then you leave everything. If you study architecture, at least you have the world in some architectural ontology, and then you discover that how it is built maybe is not valid for everybody. And I think we are part of the problems. So I don't think we will find a solution by using the same tools and methods, although even we find that they are very encompassing, very inclusive, very open, very open-ended, and very, very correct. I think it's wrong. It's the wrong way. So I think we have to look for other ways, which is an open question too, and maybe it's fate.
Somebody can present another way, perhaps, if they thought about it.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Hilbert. I'm from Denmark, Aarhus in Denmark. I think one of the key aspects here is the term mutual learning. And I think without a local partner, we cannot do anything at all. So I think, everything would be a superimposing of our own Western ideas. I don't think it's bad that we have our Western ideas, but I think it's very good to challenge them again and again with other views or other perspectives. And I think that's the most rich, the richest aspect of going abroad and doing projects abroad, to confront our ideas or ideologies, if you want, with another view and learn from them. But on the other side, I think there are also values in our own ideas of the welfare state or whatever, which we can bring to other places where we can manage to give maybe groups a voice that wouldn't get a saying in a project or so on. And that's where we can contribute in coming from the outside and raising maybe the status of a task a little bit, because there's an attention from the outside. It's an attention from the West. Why not use this status sometimes to get a project running and to do something with a project?
But what I miss in the presentation is, I think, this response of when we go there with our ideas and we use them for our first analysis, probably something happens. But in the presentations, I think it was not so explicit that something happens and that you changed your mind. so this mind shift, I think there are not so many witnesses that maybe that's the end. I agree with the principle of mutual learning, but I know somebody who plays music and he tried to learn sitar. He was a guitar player and said it's impossible to learn to play sitar if you're not Indian.
Hello. This is Plácido speaking. I am professor at the A Coruña Architecture School in Spain. I have been working in a joint venture with Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, Mozambique. We are involved in a learning service experience in a favela inside Maputo, which is almost of the city itself. Is up to 90% of the city population lives in such an environment. What we learned about this experience, this so long experience at the moment, we didn't learn anything about Mozambique at all. Well, there are a lot of tools to learn about Africa, Mars, Jupiter, the history, the future, I don't know. So that is not the point for me. We didn't need to go to Mozambique to learn anything. We almost know what was happening there. That was the reason why we chose to go there. What we learned mainly was about ourselves, about the profession we are running. And the very first question we learn about our profession is that our profession is not a profession, it's a service. We must offer a service to the people which are in need of architecture. We also understand the architecture not as a business, but as a right. It should be maybe a human right. As water, as freedom, as many other things. We learn also that aesthetics is not important at all. I have learned that the most beautiful thing is a single roof over your head. That is beauty at all. Of course, Bordeaux Cathedral is of course, a pretty beautiful building. We also have learned that we don't need architects, but we need architecture in order to change the world. That is what I have to say. I know that I am opening a dangerous gate.
Hello, I'm Hossein Aliwancho. I'm a teacher at both schools of Bordeaux and Toulouse. I heard many interventions this morning about us as architects intervening in foreign contexts and being an issue about moving into these contexts with our own cultural bagage culturel. I don't know if you say that in English, cultural baggage or luggage. And would that be an issue? And working with Claire Parrin and Carlos in this RBW, Postmaster, and in other different programs, crosses my mind that what we were talking about and what we do in our work very often has to do with processes that try to associate local populations, and that in these processes there is we try to introduce some form of empowerment, and that what happens in that process is that, of course, we come in with our own culture, but we're also working with people and receiving their culture and information, and it's a virtuous circle or cycle where I come thinking maybe I can inform you, but you inform me in return. I slightly change you, but you change me also. And at the end of the day, for me, in my mind, that only commits me. I get the impression, especially when we're working in rural areas, we're reintroducing bottom-up information in the conceptual or the design process, and that's what kind of anchors project. The bottom-up is not just, participation or concentration. It's just taking this information that is not just from the drawing table, it's coming from the field. And I always think the truth is always in between. It's never one thing or the other. That's my feeling about what I'm hearing.
Okay. Well, all these topics we are talking about show that there's a position, perhaps a humanistic position from Europe to emerging countries, but at the same time, in these countries, they are asking for to Europe to receive, you know, knowledge, technical, and how you think this it's possible to give an answer to this question from their own countries, okay? From the, you know, the desire, the need of this country to progress. But the goal of this discussion is, of course, to speak about what you think is the ways to from Europe, you know, to go to this country, to emerge into the global south, and to perhaps to treat, you know, what we saw as problems, you know, as Europeans, okay, because the poverty, okay, there are lots of problems, of course, but at the same time, in the emerging country of the south, the societies are asking for, you know, have technical or some kind of education, you know, they see in the Western countries as an ideal. So how you think this, you know, is possible to go an answer to this question?
Thank you. Well, starting from your question, maybe you... Can you hear me? Okay. So starting from your question, you all know Victor Papanek's book, Design for the Real World. It was written in the late 70s, and maybe it was pretty early for that society, because he's criticizing the good-looking design, and for him the best practice are sometimes ugly objects. And he says that for designers working abroad in the so-called free world countries, it is a question of responsibility to go there and have an in-depth understanding of the reality. I mean, not to go like a superstar designers for 2 weeks and then everybody is amazed, oh, the superstar came among us. And then after 2 weeks when he's leaving, they are standing there and said, okay, and now what can we do? Because we can't use anything of what he said. So he says, when you want to have a pro bono work, you have to go there for a year. And I said that to my students. They are not going, but for the second part. And during your current activity, you have to charge your clients big. I mean, pro bono is one, and working with your clients, it's another thing. So if you want to really help, you have to go there and really understand. And now, with your permission, I will come to my own experience, which is not from outside Europe, but from some accessibility programs that were developed through Erasmus. The first one, called Locus, was issued by the University of Barcelona in Sant Cugat, School of Architecture. And it was a 3-year workshop program. Then it was taken the same idea of accessibility by the university from Montpellier, and then from Tampere, and then from Milazzo. So totally there were 8 workshops about accessibility, and our students had to deal with this problem, how disabled people can use the environment. And sometimes it was a total surprise. They found out how with what kind of problems people with disabilities has to deal. So when I'm saying it is a different experience, it's architecture, usually in School of Architecture, it's about image. So the question is, what should we teach our students to really have an in-depth understanding, not research, not only research, but understanding, which includes more than a rational approach, which includes empathy, to know the people who you are working for, or just a good-looking image. A good-looking image nowadays is bringing you success. If you consider education as education for success, you have to teach them how to be successful. But if you want to have a more responsible approach, you have to teach them otherwise. So this is a pretty hard thing to settle. If you think about business, okay, my students are paying, or the state, or somehow somebody's paying for their studies. So what should I give them? The recipe of success or a responsible approach? Okay, thank you.
Yes. If you ask me what our partners in Mozambique can expect from us, let me not to speak about the global south, but only about Mozambique. That is a pretty special country. It is independent since 1975. Well, really 1983, as it got into a civil war. Well, the idea. One day I landed in Maputo, and I say to that people, hey guys, I am your partner. That is a sort of simplification. Okay, what can our partners in Mozambique expect from us? This is a pretty difficult question. The team, have asked a lot of times. Every single day we are asking the same question, even 5 years later. And at the time, we exactly don't know what they can expect from us. And we are so careful with these issues. We don't want to give them anything. We are just running together in a race, which is running in Maputo bidon bills, and we are just running together, as I say. This idea has been there from the very beginning of the partnership. In summary, what we gave to these people, in between brackets, I will say that we didn't give them expertise, neither knowledge. They had all this expertise and all this knowledge, of course, much better developed than we have about the local situation. Really, we drop money, European money, into the pretty poor economy. They were in need of money, not a lot, but enough money to run this project. The other point that we are giving to the Mozambican team is this kind of things. To speak about Mozambique in Europe in our papers, in our reviews, in our classrooms. I think this is important for them, and I am really proud of these two things. Thank you. Kanimambo.
Okay, I'm Els Hannes from Hasselt University. We also have a cooperation with Africa, with Tanzania, and we developed a design studio together with Ardi University. Now, in this cooperation, it was funded by the Flemish government. We really thought of what we could also give to our Tanzanian partners. So we applied not only for funding for our staff to travel there and for our students to travel there, but we also applied for funding for their staff to come to Belgium and for their students to come to Belgium. And when we started this cooperation, our partner in Tanzania asked us, okay, what do you want to learn from this experience? And we said, oh, why do you want to do this? And we said, well, we want to teach our students how to operate in an international context because we think it is important. And then they said, yes, that is important for our students too. They have to be educated as well to operate in an international context, but they cannot afford to go abroad. We're stuck here. So this is something that really, that I'm taking into account. And when I apply for funding, I try to make it really a bilateral cooperation in which we offer students from Africa also to come to our to our country and to experience the way we practice architecture over here. The best thing that could happen is that we could get a group of Tanzanian students in Belgium to work on a Belgian problem and to see how they perceive our societal issues, because we also have societal issues in Belgium. Of course, it's not about doing the one thing or the other, it's about doing both and offering young people the opportunity to discover and to work in different contexts.
Excuse me, which kind of exercise, which kind of action exactly you teach them to have this teaching for them, you know, to give them this instrument from European or
yeah,
context.
we invite the staff for training, because this is how it's called in Erasmus Plus when you operate between program countries, incoming staff for training. They take part in courses, they take part in juries, final juries of projects of different programs, and we take them to field trips, study trips, and we show them what we think is good architecture in our context. That's it. Actually, we are inviting them and we are showing them the hospitality that they show to us when we go over there. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. What? Okay.
Yeah, I come from Bergen in Norway, and although we have maybe mostly been colonialized by others, I really feel and sense this post-colonial approach when working in other countries. And although we are from this small school, we have had a lot of different long-term collaborations with others, both in Asia and in other places. But I think maybe what really makes a big difference for our school was the moment going from teaching in Norwegian to teaching more in English, and then to really have this big influx of students from abroad and to see this, the change it does to the way we work in Norway, and also the legitimacy that it really gives us as a voice in a local context. And we were fortunate to have a female welder architect from Iceland, for instance, and we had a male ballet dancer from Copenhagen, and those voices and those contributions to professional discussions really do a big difference. But I think one of the challenges we see when trying to create that diversity is the way we should approach the portfolios in the process of accepting all these nice voices coming from other cultures of study, because many of the strengths we actually seek, for instance, from students from Africa, is not so easy to detect from the portfolios and the systems of education that they have been within. So it would be very interesting to hear about different approaches to enhance this richness in vocabularies and in properties of these students.
My name is Heidi Merl, and I'm from the School of Architecture in Aarhus. And I think what you are addressing is super important, that we also try to create this diversity where we are. I just want to elaborate a bit on one of my experience from the studio with candidates in the school. And for the past year, we had this assignment because Aarhus is the cultural capital city of Europe this year. And they wanted to have the whole region involved. And normally we work very much in the cities, in the urban context. So we asked the students to go in a rural area, if you can call it in Denmark a rural area, probably it's not. And looking at the results of working in the rural area, and we did a lot of engagements with local citizens and did citizens meetings and events and all kinds of different activities in order to really integrate the citizens. Then in the end of the day, it was really, really difficult for the students to deal with the context of industrial farming, because that's the rural area of Denmark. So they are so used to a context, the urban context, so this suddenly different context that they are not at all used to work in. They really lost themselves a little bit. So I think there is also a need to perhaps bring something to Europe in order to deal with some of these rural areas that are really not working well. And I think perhaps the diversity of people and learning from other places might help in this context, because it seems like you don't have to go very far to find the challenge of actually creating architecture and in a rural area, and definitely saying only for perhaps for looking at Denmark, we are really dealing with a huge problem with villages disappearing and taken over by industries. So that's a different aspects of course learning with the world.
Yeah, and I have one more thing, because I guess there's nobody from Sweden here now, but at least in Norway we've seen that there are more and more preschools that are to recruit the students into architecture through art and other things. And in Stockholm they have purposely made one of these preschools in one of the harshest suburbs of Stockholm with to really try to force a different type of recruitment of architecture students. And that's maybe also one thing that is quite essential in establishing a good culture of studying architecture and being relevant.
My name is Ali Haddad, and I'm coming from Lebanon, so I'm an external observer in a way, and I look at it quite in amazement. You know, I appreciate and I admire a lot this interest in going outside of Europe and trying to see where and how you could help other cultures. But the question that comes to my mind, and there are actually two questions, is that relates somehow to the discussions this morning and the lectures is, are we still really looking at architecture as a métier, as a profession, or are we now sort of looking at it as a kind of experience abroad, getting to know people, to feel empathy and all that? Is it more in this direction or not? The second question is related, is are these experiences happening in the first tier of education, the first 3 years, or is this something post-graduate? And then maybe I'll have some more questions.
I would like to respond to that a little bit. I think on my first week of architecture studies at the ETH in Zurich, we had a sociology professor who told us about what a good architect should be. Not the specialist who knows a lot about a very small thing, and not the generalist who knows a lot about very little about a lot, but a kind of enlightened specialist, an enlightened generalist who knows to ask the right questions in solving his daily problems. And I think it's very important that we get more and more insight also of other cultures, especially that because our activities as Western architects in other cultures increases now and will increase in the future, so that we get a better understanding as human beings, but also as an architect, to ask the right questions. And that has also a basic, that needs also a basic understanding of other cultures, or a certain toolkit how to approach other cultures. And as I said before, also something that teaches us a certain humility. I know there is always this kind of black cloud of cultural colonialism hovering above us when we do something in a foreign country. But I think we have already done so much in foreign countries. And as Els said before, people there, nowadays they want those concrete structures, even though it doesn't suit their climate at all. That's their kind of idea of modernity. And maybe we can tidy up a little bit in some places and tell them, hey, there's so much richness you already have. And we come with it with foreign eyes and experience them for the first time maybe, and can get amazed about that, and maybe this learning and teaching about the existing richness in those countries can help us to a better dialogue, and maybe also to a better behavior when we go abroad. Just a very small example. I was studying rural villages and the new rural villages in India with my students. And we came to a place that had the most cleanest village. There was no garbage on the street, and that means a lot of India. There was beautiful huts, and the mayor there was very good in getting programs, because he was following all those ideas of the government of becoming a smart village. And there were cameras everywhere in the street, which were connected to the screens in the mayor's office, where he could see if people trashed or littered some trash on the streets, and he could interact with them directly. The same thing in the school. They had cameras in every school room, where the parents and the headmaster could zoom into the classes and interact directly if something happened. And I mean, all those kind of crazy things that come from Western influence, of course. I think it's also a little bit our responsibility to go abroad and maybe tell about the dangers of those aspects. That's just a new angle, maybe.
Okay, I'm Opa Koponen from Tampere, Finland. We have no previous colonies in Finland, so we cannot go to our former colonies to tell how to do architecture. We have been occupied by Swedes and Russians and so on. And we also in our school, I'm ashamed to say that we don't have these these kind of projects abroad that we go to help people. But we have our own international masters program, and we invite people from the former third colonies, the global south, and etc. And they are wonderful people because the Finnish architecture students, they are only concerned about design, to be master designers. And when we give them the task, they start to design the next hour, and design and how to be, and to look at the Arc Daily and what are the top designs nowadays. But these foreign students, they have always, they come with concepts, they come with consciousness, and so we are not giving anything, we are getting from this international. So it's, well, that's selfish, of course, that we are only getting, not giving anything, but that's, I think, opposite view of much of these wonderful things that I've seen today and yesterday.
In this case, the question perhaps I would ask you, okay, you give them you know, this knowledge. You think they need, you know, to be better as architects. How you can measure, how to evaluate when I suppose they return to their countries. The knowledge they learned in university is useful in their countries.
Unfortunately, most of them stay in Finland.
Okay, so perhaps the question, perhaps this one, the goal, how to learn, to learning that is useful themselves when they return in their countries. Who can answer? I repeat, the goal perhaps is, okay, if you, the question is, we learned foreign students and you gave them, I mean, instruments that we think are good ones, are the better ones, and different for this attitude to learn from them. How it's possible to evaluate that this knowledge we gave them are useful when they return to their countries? Is it possible? Perhaps not possible to measure. No, it's just
I think we have to be more precise in our debate. I have the impression that we are proud that we have studio work, and that was the pedagogy of architectural education, and then you had Beaux-Arts and apprenticeship and all these other things. And then it was a critique on the studio, and then we had live projects, and students had to move and engage with, and then it was okay and all right. But you have so many different approaches and reasons to do it, and you have the hidden curriculum, and you have all this. And I have the impression that now we send our students abroad. Instead of buying handbooks and have them read, we send them to somewhere else, and learning will take place. And now we are very imprecise in our discussion. I think, yes, we will have knowledge, and which will be very useful when they come to us and have the optimal environments and learning environments to share this knowledge, and when they go back they will have this knowledge and can apply this knowledge, and then this learning outcome has reached, and it can be paid for, and it can be quantified, and it can be measured. And I think it's very valid and almost inescapable to work in this condition. I think that's one thing. If we want to use these other environments and local communities to give our students another understanding of how we live in the world, then we should reach this understanding, and I completely agree, and that's an amazingly difficult thing. A reaching understanding can be done in another way than doing research. So it has nothing to do with research. Research is only one way of understanding, and probably it risks to be extremely narrow, and you will not discover lots of things. I can be more precise about this. We have a project with the Maroon village in Suriname, and Maroons are recognized UNESCO population, but it are in fact the escaped slaves who are imported from Africa. When they managed to escape, they went into the woods, and they stayed there till now in villages. So they still have this culture of living in another forest, which they were able to adapt. They're living in family structures, but the family structures are not blood bands, because it were the plantations who made the families. The slaves from one plantation went away, but from the family maybe was one in another plantation. So they made a new structure, but still they have an own way of having knowledge. So the way of sharing knowledge and dealing with knowledge is completely different than us. They call it goni, and knowledge has power also. So you have secret knowledge, because not everybody is able to use this knowledge. And there are secrets within the family, and you have to be very careful how to transfer them to others. And it cannot be done anyway, anyhow and anywhen. You have to prepare people to be able to use this knowledge. And the other knows that your knowledge exists, but it will not be transferred. So if you really want to understand how they live, for instance, we ask them, can you show us the village? And they start to show us all the plants. We were interested in the kitchens and the houses and the concrete houses instead of the wooden kitchens, and all these kind of transformations. It has no significance for them, or very, very little. So I think reaching this understanding is extremely fundamental. I think else is very precise and clear, that she says our learning outcome was to learn students work in an international collaboration. And then you have this established collaboration between universities. So then you can be very precise. That's what the experience we offer. So in terms of offering experiences, we have to be precise which experience we offer to students, why this takes place in this context, and it's just one context, I think. Now, because of the conference, we have really a focus on this context as an educational capacity of this context, but it's just one, and it's connected to why and to the question. So if you ask, sometimes they have a question for us, come and help us. I think you have to be very critical about why this question, who puts it, what is the interest, what will happen when we are gone, who will take care of it, what's the sustainability of it, who will pay for it, who will maintain it. And I think it's a matter of applying our knowledge. It's not an academical question. Then it should be industry, and they have to get paid for it, or have one or another kind of entrepreneurial engagement with it. And if it's not about application knowledge, then it's very suspect maybe what we can do as academic, because maybe we can mainly be critical towards the question, and then it doesn't help them at all, and then we have other kinds of discussions. So my plea is to be precise why we get this kind of connection to other places.
Well, of course, when you involved in a dialogue, in a discussion, you are assuming a risk. If you don't want to take risk, don't talk to the others, don't listen to the others, stay where you are, and you will be safe. But when you are going someplace else, when you are talking to somebody and have a dialogue, or just listen to somebody, you are taking your chances, because maybe your whole world will be taken upside down. So I think that going abroad and working there with the students, it's about having an experience which you can take, like the contemporary need for exotic, for reaction versus globalization, which is let's look for tradition. Everything is global, let's go to some specific place where it's something different and it's somehow looking for exotic. Or let's take a look in the past, and it's a kind of way of getting out of our world. What I mean to say is, if we take these experiences not in this way, like looking for escapes, for exotic or for tradition, things that or local versus global, and tradition versus modernization, it's just an escape. It's just looking for something that we need. But if we are looking for more experiences for us and for our students, I think it will train us all in order to be able to deal with different situations. as you said, going outside of the city, the students can't deal with that environment. So I think each client and each situation is different. If you open your mind to different situations and to different experience since your student training, I think it's a very important achievement. So in my opinion, it's better to look at these exchanges in this way. Let's open our minds to be able to deal with different challenges that our profession will face us with. And not just looking for exotic and for something that our modern, restless world is not offering us. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just continuing with your line of arguments. My name is Leandro Madrazo. I'm from Barcelona School of Architecture, La Salle. I was presenting the project Oikonet before. I think that we are experiencing now a moment of crisis, which is reflected by this need to search for something original, genuine, that we have lost. Because if we go back to the time of modern architecture, and going back to your question about le métier from architect, I think there was probably a time, if we understand the modernity of the modern movement architecture in that time, where architects were secure about what architecture was, what a building is, what a city is, what a house is. The statement of Le Corbusier I mentioned before in my presentation, a machine to live in. I mean, we are not sure at the moment about anything. I think this is our problem. We cannot colonize intellectually other worlds because we are not secure about our own cultural achievement at the moment. I think it's a representation of a moment of crisis, which, as always, can be interpreted in a negative or positive way. I think in the positive ways is in the way I understand your comment. I think it's a positive way because we have to rebuild many things, many structures, political structures, also educational structures in architecture. We have to rebuild our discourse. And I think the approach of going away is not a geographical distance. We go away from our structures, from our established way of thinking, which maybe was valid for certain decades for modern architecture, but we feel, and I think probably this is a shared conviction, that is no longer valid for many different reasons. So we have to go away, but not to the far distance worlds. We go away from our way of thinking, and we go back, as we have happened in other times in culture, to the source, to the origins, and we become again enthusiastic about the people, how are living in favelas or in how they build, and like this kind of naiveness that we had in the past to be again surprised by the original because we don't believe anymore in our cultural constructions. This is one way to understand it, I think, that goes into, you know, I agree with you that going away is not just to do a kind of, now going on your question about the métier. I mean, I also have the feeling sometimes that we are doing like NGOs for architecture, right? So everything is very exciting. We feel very good because we go there and help, and we come back and we did a great job. Or we go for an exotic experience, and we also feel back because it's another kind of tourism, cultural tourism. I think this is the kind of critique that we could do maybe to some of these experiences if we do it in the wrong way, not in the way that the colleague was commenting before. But I think that we should not lose sight neither that we have a moral obligation with students. We are not there to entertain them, to do interesting experiences. We are teaching something that they have to make a profession out of it. Somebody this morning said that nobody came to his office to ask for something, that he was just indeed inventing the commission in a way. It's a, let's say, positive way to react to the situation. But also in the other way around, we are expecting to train professionals that they have a value in their knowledge, that they can change in the labor market, and we are doing that for them. We are not just spending 5 years doing exotic tourist cultural experiences, I guess. We also have some kind of commitment and moral commitment in that point.
I ask to you, I ask to other teachers, this kind of attitude, okay, you present, if you tell us in practical, you know, in concrete pedagogical experience, you have any experience you can show us?
Well, I was presenting before the ECONET project, which was a collaboration of 34 institutions, 25 countries in Europe and 4 countries outside. Don't have a direct experience like our colleague said. I'm talking more from an outside perspective and from the experience of coordinating this project. I do have experiences at the local level with participation in neighborhoods since many years. In our School of Architecture, we started to involve neighbors already 19 years ago in the first project I did when I arrived to the school in Barcelona. And I think that there's also a topic that has been mentioned before. We don't have to go far away to see the South. We have the South in our neighborhoods, in our countries, and that's what, in that I do have direct experience. But what I was commenting before is that even though we have done projects and we have committed students and citizens in defining problems and finding solutions to the problems, sometimes I have mixed feelings about that, because I don't think that we are tackling to the power structures that change reality with these projects, but we're only just doing, again, interesting pedagogic experiences, but then when the project is finished, the reality in the city and the decisions, the big decisions, are continuing to be taken by other kind of power structures that are not in the hands of the neighbors or in the hands of architectural teachers or even architectural professionals. So I think this is also something that we should not forget. Where are the power structures and where are our role in relation to them? Because otherwise, again, we can be naive in that regard.
Yeah, I want to respond to some of the issues. First of all, I want to clarify, I'm not against international exchange, to the contrary. When I assumed the position of chair of the department in 2000, I immediately launched international studios, workshops, etc., with European countries mainly. But I remember, you know, this English saying that says, little knowledge is very dangerous. And like the gentleman who talked about the question of the exotic versus the more elaborate studies, I'm more personally in favor of those projects that really have a certain longue durée, that have an approach to seriously engage with other cultures over a long term. And definitely I think Europe has a role to play, not out of guilt, out of a guilt feeling of colonialism and all that. I mean, we are in the 21st century and the ecological issues are more pressing, and I think part of the big problems Europe will encounter is the flood of refugees that are gonna be escaping other problems. So I think out of this, it is important for different schools to develop different kinds of projects, engaging, you know, mainly the African and continent and the Middle East. But I hope in this approach, you know, because I also come from an American experience where out of the search for diversity, pluralism, and all that stuff, at the end they kind of level down to 250 or 300 programs that are very similar, with few that are really differentiated. And I hope that Europe, out of this kind of search for also diversity and enriching experiences, would not come to this and would not lose the specificity that makes, you know, the Barcelona school or the Porto school or the Venice school, that are kind of distinguished, or the Zurich school, kind of distinguished in their approach to the métier. And finally, I think it's essential, no matter what we do, to really start with teaching students, if we are still calling it an architecture degree, the métier in those 3 or 4 years at the beginning. Then the later phase would be that phase of exploration, opening up, etc. It's kind of like, you know, what is done in comparative literature after you learn the other language. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to say something about a motto that is already flying over this meeting, and you mentioned it some minutes ago, which is globalization. I think that we should learn that this is a sort of lie in terms of architecture, as 80% of the architecture schools are located on the north. This is not globalization. Near 100% of the architecture highlights are located on the north. Richness is in the north, technology is in the north, power is in the north, power is white, CO2 is in the north, and power is male, which is a sort of north. But problems are in the south, hungry, dust, etc., and lack of housing, and lack of almost everything. So, yeah, we are not running exotic holidays, Leandro. We are learning things we should address to fight against the real structures that rule the world. Yeah, that is what we must learn in this world, actually. Even as architects, as citizens architects, of course, we must be committed with the common will. Okay.
Hi, Morgan Flynn from the University of Limerick in Ireland. I suppose I was going to say something, but I think that it's maybe a little bit problematic to be so cut and dry about defining the South as being dusty and poor, and we should act in response to that condition. I think that the students that we bring into Limerick and our students that work in Morocco in particular, the things that they take away from that is that the sun is in a different place in the sky. You know, in Ireland, we look for the sun, and in Morocco, you hide from the sun. And we have a regulatory system that's overpowering and stifling, and fire escapes, all that kind of joyful stuff, and they don't. But I think in some ways what we try to equip them with is a knowledge that they need to observe whatever the local is, and the local for each project is different. So that could be the next town in Ireland, or the difference between being beside the sea or not beside the sea, or being in urban Denmark or rural Denmark. So that definition of local is to do with immediacy, because globally, I mean, my children play computer games with people 10,000 kilometers away, and I talk to my friends in Australia more than I talk to my friends in Dublin. So I think that in some ways the definition of global and local is fluid and open, and I think that when students come to us, wherever they're coming from, we have to teach them almost in the same way and equip them with the tools to go back to wherever they're from, wherever that is, and act as good, kind, socially conscious architects.
Lachlan Keeley is my name, from Dublin, Ireland as well. I just want to make a couple of observations, really. I'm reminded in terms of the discussion of the fact that if you went back to the 1960s, in the discipline of sociology, there was a major confrontation there on the whole issue of participant observation as a way of actually penetrating into social problems and coming up with appropriate solutions. I see some analogies in the conversation that we're having. And it seems to me that the question for us as a collective is to how can we somehow harvest the diverse experiences that we are collecting now and turn them into something related to the mainstream of architectural education. Because this is more what we need to consider, that in the end, that our responsibilities are primarily to ourselves in terms of what we are learning and the impact of what we learn on what we do. I just make that point simply.
Okay, well, perhaps just a little conclusion, but I would like to have a collective conclusion. I agree with you that the localization, in the terms you told, are a problem, you know, with the concentration in the north, the poverty in the south, and of course, donc, the School of Architectures find reasons to go to the south and to help to resolve this problem. The question of responsibility you told is right, but at the same time, this responsibility is one way. But I mean, the responsibility means we use the instruments of the north in the south, and perhaps to reproduce the problem of the north in the south, or at the opposite, perhaps we can to learn from the south, and perhaps it's a chance, you know, working with the south to learn something different that can help to us schools in the north. I think this, to me, this is a very interesting aspect to analyze. Well, okay, thank you very much.